Hey everybody, we should have motivation to do this presentation today. It's about motivation. Motivation is quite obviously one of my favorite subjects to talk about. Why we all should do and have motivation, as the last slide will say, to be someone good and do something great. What better motivation in life is there? Think about it for a second. Be somebody good, do something great. Anything, doesn't matter what it is. Build a park, clean a park, write a book, teach a student something they don't know that's going to help them be somebody good and do something great. In this presentation, we're focusing more on organizations, what organizations can do to be a motivating force in a person's life. Whether you're the CEO, the president of an organization, a human resource manager, an operations manager, whatever position you hold, even if that position is a first-line supervisor, you have an ability at some point in time to help somebody in their life, to help them be something and do something. More than anything, I hope people take the opportunity to recognize that and then take that further opportunity to do something about it. Great words from Lee Iacocca, who said that his parents taught him so much, but then they also said, now do something with it. We often forget that last part. It's kind of why I come up with these thoughts that you have to dream of something great, but then you have to be determined to achieve it. The dream is great. The dream shows you the way to go. But unless you have that corollary aspect, which is be determined to achieve it, you'll never really achieve those grand ambitions that you have. So let's talk about motivation. Lou Holtz was a great coach. He coached at Notre Dame. I went to USC, so there's somewhat of a rivalry with Notre Dame. But he is quite an interesting person. He said something one time which says, "I'm not a great motivator. I just get rid of the people who can't motivate themselves." That's one of the best statements I've ever read. I'll say it again, and then I'll go to the next slide. I'm not a great motivator. I just get rid of the people who can't motivate themselves. The thought on motivation is we all can motivate other people. The fact is, we technically, and it's a challenge if we technically can't motivate somebody else. All that we can do is figure out what motivates somebody else and then try to give it to them. But to come up with a great speech to motivate somebody else doesn't necessarily work unless what's in that speech appeals to that person. And as you can see, as you give a speech to several, dozens, hundreds of people, it's very difficult in a speech to motivate a group unless there's a sense of commonality within that group, unless that group is motivated to achieve the same thing. If they're not, that speech isn't really going to work. Because one thing we've learned about motivation is the literal definition of motivation is it's an inner state that causes someone to behave in a way that ensures the accomplishment of a goal. It's the reason people exert and expend effort. So let's think about that for a second. It's an inner state that causes someone to behave in a certain way. When I was younger, my parents used to pay us for grades. At the end of the semester, they would give us, some years ago, $100 for an A, $75 for a B, and $50 for a C. That didn't last very long because they got rid of the $50 for the C. But then we had to start paying them if we got less than a C or a D, or the last is an F. None of us got an F. And so we got our report cards and we were very excited because we knew we were going to get money. And especially towards the end of the semesters, we would work even harder to make sure that our grades were exactly where they should be. It's a great motivating factor because it was something that we wanted, money. We wanted money because of what we can do with that money. It's a great lesson, right? A lesson I really never forgot. Years later, did the same thing with our kids. But it's not just money, of course. You can go on a certain trip or you can get something when you go on that trip. we used to, and still do, go to Disneyland every year. And we used to arrange, if they did something well, that they would get certain advantages when they went to Disneyland. We'd eat at a certain restaurant. We'd buy certain tickets outside of Disneyland or go to other places. Something that was important to the kids that allowed them, that encouraged them to perform. It just doesn't work in the personal life, though. Let's look at this statement from a person by the name of Chester Bernard. Chester Bernard was a very, very famous individual. What was famous about Chester Bernard? Chester Bernard studied management, studied organizations, and he wrote one time, if all those who may be considered contributors to the organization are arranged in order of their willingness to serve, with those most willing at the top and those least willing at the bottom, the preponderance of persons in a modern society always lies on the negative side with reference to any organization. In more common terms, what is he saying? He said if you took, let's say, 100 employees, and you ranked those employees, starting at the top, the person who was the most willing to serve the organization, and at the bottom, the person least willing to serve the organization. And if you line those 100 people up to where they should be, some more at the top, some more at the bottom, some more in the middle, wherever it would be, if you took all those people and lined them up on those that are most willing at the top and least willing at the bottom, he says the preponderance, or most, of people in a modern society, our society, are always going to be towards the bottom. Most of our employees don't want to serve the organization. They're not excited, enthused, encouraged to really serve, participate, the word I would use, contribute in that organization. That makes it very difficult to motivate them. It makes them exceedingly difficult because at our very core, we have a group of people that really don't want to be there. They're there for one reason or another, usually because they have to have a certain standard of living, and they have to give up so much of their life so that they can achieve this standard of living. Let's be honest, they need money. Very few people don't need money. And so we in an organization are going to be challenged, especially supervisors, to motivate our staff because most of the people don't want to be there. I've used this statement for many years, probably 15. I don't remember the date of this. But I still believe it's true. I still believe in all of the work that I've done and all of the consulting I continue to do. I still believe this statement is true. Most of the people choose a profession, choose a position that they really don't like. But they choose it because it gives them a standard of living of which they want. So what can we do? Earlier I said, really the only way we can motivate somebody is to find out what they want and then try to figure out, secondly, how to give it to them. The process of motivation is really kind of interesting. It's an unsatisfied need. We, in management, or as parents, have to figure out what that unsatisfied need is. I want a Game Boy. Very popular game for children. My son still plays it, actually. Or I want a promotion in the workplace. It's an unsatisfied need. Then there's the activity in motivation, where they engage in behavior to satisfy the need. I'm going to work harder. I'm going to work longer. I'm going to do whatever that person says I need to do in order to achieve that unsatisfied need that I have. And then we arrive at the goal. One of the easiest ways to understand motivation is the hunger aspect. If you have an unsatisfied need, which means you're hungry. Your activity is go get food. Pretty simple, right? Predicated that food is there. And then the last part is you eat it. You've satisfied your need. There's many different historical examples that we've seen with motivation. There's the carrot and stick. This goes back to even some religious aspects talk about the carrot and the stick. That's where you get the donkey to move. And if we want to think of a picture, it's the picture of having a long stick with a carrot in front of it that's just ahead of the donkey. A donkey just can't get it, but they're motivated to continue to get that carrot. That's why they move. Religion, as I mentioned, is a tremendous example of where motivation was included. I'm not making a religious statement or argument, but literature going back thousands of years talks about this type of motivation. In particular, the king dangling rewards before some type of hero. And more currently, the Industrial Revolution. Farmers flooded the cities because as technology allowed farmers to create more products without necessarily more inputs or more labor, that labor moved to the cities. They moved to the cities because technology, again, was creating manufacturing plants, assembly lines. And they needed more people to work in the cities than they did on the farms. Businesses offered, in some cases, a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. And people said, I would rather have that. I can make more money. I can advance my career, take better care of my family and friends if I move to the cities. That was the reward for them moving out of small towns and moving into large cities. The consequence of that was that they made more money, but also they encountered externalities, we call them, other aspects that they didn't expect to. There was much more pollution. There was the conditions of living so many people in a small town, which rapidly became bigger. The hygiene and health and safety wasn't what it was intended to do, simply because too many people moved into the cities. Hopefully what we've learned is it's difficult to motivate people. They may not be honest in what truly motivates them. If you meet with your employee and say, what can I do to motivate you? How many employees are going to say, I want more money. I want your job. Instead, they're going to say, the work is everything that I thought it would be. I'm just so happy to be here. This is a great place, especially when you interview for a job. You're going to be less forthright. I don't like to use the word honest. Less forthright. You're not necessarily going to tell them exactly why you're there. I'm here because I lost my previous job. I'm here because you offer more money than my current job, therefore I'm willing to move. Some employers won't hire you, they think you're just after the money. So you're often not going to get the true reason why people are going to apply for a job, are going to stay in a job. It could be, I'm going to stay in this job because no one else will hire me. I'm not going to say that. So it's difficult to find out what people truly want, because what they truly want may put them in a bad light. It's also difficult to motivate people because they have poor habits. Exercise, nutrition, smoking. It affects their mental well-being. Taking better care of yourself, physically, mentally, allows you to be a more motivating force. People also have a lack of supportive family and friends. The illustrious, be somebody good, do something great, may not exist in their family. There's that famous individual says, you'll never make it. It'll never work. From the Lilliputians. A great show. That's a person who's very negative. It'll never work. There's some people who live in that type of family. You never amount to anything. I have friends whose parents have said the exact same thing. You're going to end up just like me. When somebody is younger and doesn't have the physical, especially mental, maturity to be able to understand those statements and overcome them, it can be quite debilitating. So, what can we do in the workplace? We want to make sure that we have a high level of performance that results in greater productivity. Productivity is creating more products with the same level of inputs. That's the hope. We want to hire few people, but we want those few people to perform and to be as productive as possible. There's only three aspects that translates into somebody being productive, which we as supervisors and operations managers should focus upon. One is we got to hire individuals with the ability. They have to have the mental and physical power to accomplish something. I was raised on a ranch. We did a lot of work back in the day that you probably don't have to do as much today. For instance, irrigating. We used to have to carry pipes to and from hook them up and make sure that the water was flowing as well as it could. Now, most of our orchards are sprinklers. But back in the day, you had to have the ability to lift these pipes, to connect them, to make sure that the water came out as well as it could have. Then you have to have the environment. You have to have the training and the resources. You have to have the tools. It's great if we want to do irrigation, but if we didn't have the proper pipes, we wouldn't be able to irrigate. Lastly is the motivation. You have to really want to do it. Again, on the ranch, I certainly have the ability. We certainly have the tools, the environment. The motivation, not so much. In fact, none of us work in the family farms today. It's something that we really never liked to the level that our parents did. My dad was raised on a ranch, and he still to this day does ranch work and oversees the ranches. It's something that he's always liked to do. Maybe it's been born into him from such a young age. Us too as well, but we had so many more options in our life than our parents did. But that is the key to motivation. You have to make sure you have the ability, the environment, and the motivation itself. That's what translates into the motivation that you see a person have. The realities of motivation, as we have seen, is that it's very difficult, that managers can't motivate employees. Motivation instead is an internal state that only that individual can control, though a manager can influence. How do they influence it? Because a manager's main task, their central role in motivation, is to find out what motivates an employee and then work like heck, as I say, to try to give it to them. If somebody wants more money, you give that person more money. If somebody wants more time, you try to give that person more time off. If that person wants the corner office, you do what you can to give that person the corner office, even if somebody else deserves it, because that person is going to be more motivated by the office than that person may be more motivated by a parking space or working from home. That's because people are motivated by different things. Lower paid workers are more motivated by money, as they're just getting by. Is it easier to motivate lower paid workers? In some ways it is. They're not as concerned about the office, the parking space, even working from home. They're more concerned with achieving a level of pay because their basic needs aren't satisfied. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Middle class workers are less motivated by money because they've met their needs. They're more motivated by the work. There's still a balance there. They're at what maybe we would call lower to middle class individuals who their basic needs, housing, food, are taken care of. But they would certainly like more, maybe some travel, better cars, better schools for their children. And so, as they're still searching for some more money, they're also looking at the work. I want to do more meaningful work. That's the attraction of being a supervisor and a manager. And then we get to the highly paid workers. These individuals are not motivated by money, contrary to what so many have heard about higher paid workers, people in high positions within an organization. The money becomes in some ways an afterthought. They make a considerable amount of money, they've saved a considerable amount of money, and now what they're more concerned with is doing meaningful work, having meaningful accomplishments. Brings us to the very last aspect that I want to converse about, which is effective motivation. Outside of effective motivation, though, there's a couple of aspects I really want to talk about, which is the tools that we have in motivation. Money, of course, status symbols, we talked about that, parking spaces, the windowed office, and less so as people are working from home. Praise. Praise is something that is free. I want to spend a second on this one because the more that you can emphasize non-economic rewards, the greater chance your organization can motivate a greater number of people. Why? Because money is less prevalent in an organization. There's only so many offices or parking spaces. But what you do have free is praise. gratuity, graciousness. All those aspects about the way you treat a person which don't cost any money. So we in management want to hire and promote supervisors, managers, and executives that realize that we need to treat our employees well, in some ways non-economically, but treat them as well as we can, because that's what we can afford. Praise is something that we can have in abundance. And now, the final slide about effective motivation. How would we effectively motivate an employee? First of all, you have to know their desired wants. You have to know what you can give an employee that will motivate them. How do you do that? You have to develop a relationship. It is not going to be an answer that you're going to receive the first time you meet an employee. Somebody, for instance, who just lost a promotion to you is not going to come to you and say on the very first day, my motivation is for you to leave and me to take your job. It's not going to happen. Rarely, maybe. Instead, you have to develop a relationship of trust and honesty. And at some point, an employee is going to say, well, you know what I really want? You know what would really make me happy? If you could do one thing for me, this would be it. Then you're going to get this. Maybe I really, because of my home situation, I would really like to work at home as much as possible. If you can do that, there's no limit to what I would contribute to this organization. Second, a job that's interesting, challenging, and responsible. In a lot of ways, this is free. This doesn't cost anything. But what it does cost is a supervisor to know what an employee wants to do. We often think we hire somebody in to a job and they have to do that job. It doesn't necessarily happen. We often don't know the consequences of our action until we take that action. We may see what the job is. We may talk to people who have done it. But until you're in the situation, it's almost impossible to know the repercussions of our decisions. And once somebody makes the decision to take a job, that may not be the best job for them. And if possible, we in an organization have to say there's other jobs that you can do. You're a very valued employee. You perform well, you're productive. I often say that we don't have to promise an employee that job, we have to promise them a job, if they deserve it. So try to find a job that's interesting, challenging. Oh, you want to do that responsibility? That task is assigned to Betty, but we'll go ahead and give it to Shakira. Because Shakira really wants it, and Betty really doesn't care. And had we not talked to both of them, we wouldn't have realized that Betty and Shakira actually wanted to change some aspects. And they're both happy, and we only found that out because we talked to them. That's where management comes into play. That's where motivation comes into play, is knowing your employees, knowing what they want, and trying to figure like heck to give it to them. 3, fair wages and recognition. Fair. Whenever I talk about fair, people say fair. Who knows what's fair? Everybody knows what's fair. There's not a person I've met that is reasonable and rational, right? Reasonable and rational means if somebody was to go outside now and look at the sky and they say, it's green. The sky is green, I don't care what anybody says, that person's not reasonable and rational. You're never going to be able to have an intelligent discussion with somebody who's not reasonable and rational. But for the vast majority of people who are reasonable and rational, if they see the sky, they know it's blue. Even if it's cloudy, they know it's blue. They know the earth is round. Those are reasonable and rational. Those individuals know what fair wages is. They know that they're getting paid a fair wage for what they're doing. If they're not getting paid a fair wage for their abilities, they know they can go somewhere else to get it. It's an impossibility in so many ways to pay somebody less than their worth, because that person would find another job that would pay them what they're worth. Now, of course, there's some people who says, I know I should be paid more. This job is 1 minute from my home, and it's convenient. So I'm willing to give up money in order to have a job that's more convenient. That's still fair wages. You know that for everything that you're getting in this job, it's fair wages. And recognition. 4th, universal confidence in management. You have to believe that the contributions you're making in that business are going to reward you over the long term. We don't want to work in a place that we feel is going to go out of business at some point. 5 and 6, even 4, the first 3 are important. The last part of it is where we get into the higher levels of Maslow's. Maslow is very smart in his motivation. I think most of it is still true. I changed some of it, but it's still true. 5 is believing work serves others. For me, it's important that the work that I do, there's some value to it. The very last slide says, be somebody good and do something great. Hopefully it comes across that I want to do something great. I want to be somebody good. I think at the end there's no better epithet to say that here's somebody good who tried to do something great. Whether it was as great as somebody else, who knows, but they really tried to do something great. And it's within our capability as a manager to create a fun place to work, where coworkers are more like friends than employees, where people want to come to work because they want to see their friends. Managers can do that. Managers can do much to motivate an employee. Hopefully, everybody's enjoyed the presentation and learned some aspects that allow you to be a better motivator. And that, in turn, can create a better employee. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the day.